Welcome to Paper and Stitches. My name is Donnelly, and I am the designer for this piece. The piece is the result of my journey in the Teacher Cum Laude program with the National Academy of Needle Arts. The program was about exploring another form of art within needlepoint. I chose handmade paper. My intention was to create something that looked like a 9-patch quilt, which is what you see here. I wanted it to hold and display a series of small pieces that would represent my journey into handmade paper. This piece ended up being a great place to try some of the new ideas I came up with along the way and be able to share my little pieces of art. This piece was a challenge, and the construction of the quilt changed a few times, but it was inspiring, which is why each square contains an encouraging word. Can you see them? I attended many classes on handmade paper, and I learned something in each class. For the most part, the classes discussed how to make paper and how to use the pulp and how to get the paper out of the vats. Here are 3 examples of pulp. This is a mold and decal, which is used to pull paper using the dip method. You place the decal on top of the mold. Then you're going to take the 2 together and put them into the water under the paper, under the pulp. And then you're going to pull up and let the water drain. Then you're going to turn that over onto a piece of sheet. And then you're going to top that with another piece of sheet. And then you're going to place a piece of wool on top of that. And you're going to repeat this process until you have about 15 rows. Once all this is done, you're going to place another piece of wood on top of that. And then you're going to take this sandwich of paper and wood, and you're going to take it over to the press. And you're going to use that press to get all the water out. And then each set of sheets are removed and hung to dry. And this takes about a day. Here is an example of the pour method and the use of a mold. In these 2 examples, the paper is air dried. Working from left to right in each row, I will discuss each square. Square 1. I used a mold and decal to pull the paper, then colored it with non-bleeding tissue paper while in the mixer. The paper was cut into strips after it dried, then weaved back together. I then backed it with stabilizer, and then it was sewn together using a sewing machine, running stitches in circles. Square 2. I again used a molded decal to pull the handmade paper. Colored it using bleeding tissue paper. Using the paper from classes I attended, I cut out flowers using a die and a Big Shot, which is used in scrapbooking. The stems are pieces of mono canvas, and the flowers were attached using beads. Square number 3 is 14-count mono canvas, which is used in needlepoint, and I colored it using bleeding tissue paper. I stitched the edge in what they call a satin stitch. All the vertical and some of the horizontal canvas threads were removed inside the satin stitch. Then yarn, canvas, dry paper, wet paper, and threads were weaved throughout the piece. Square number 4. This is using 14-count mono canvas, colored using non-bleeding tissue paper, which gives it a lighter coloring effect on the canvas. The edge was worked in a pulled back stitch. Then other various types of pulled work were used to distort the canvas. This gives it a lacy background. The finished item was cut from the canvas and mounted onto handmade paper. Square number 5. The handmade paper came from a mold and deco again, colored with non-bleeding tissue paper while it was in the mixer. Then I took 14 count mono canvas, colored it using bleeding tissue paper. Then I attached and stitched wet paper, rolled and dried, was couched onto the canvas, as well as other strips of dry and wet paper. This is square number 6, the Crazy Quilt Square. This piece uses a variety of papers from various classes. I cut them up in different shapes and sizes, and then I pieced them together and sewed them just like a crazy quilt. Then I added some embellishments of crazy quilt stitches to accent each area. The finished quilt was attached to another piece of handmade paper using a running stitch. The flower was created using a cast mold. I took paper pulp and I pressed it into the mold, and I let that dry overnight. The next day I pulled the paper away, and then I colored the paper with chalk. Square number 7. Handmade paper using mold and deco, colored using paint. The flower was created using a cast mold and colored using chalk. Square number 8. Handmade paper using mold and deco, colored using paint. I worked running stitches using a variety of threads. The flower was cut from handmade paper into the shapes you see here. The top flower was edged in a buttonhole stitch. The center of that flower is a fake bullion. The thread on the flower was colored using markers. Square number 9. Handmade paper using mold and deco, color with non-bleeding tissue paper in the mixer. Then on top of that is an 18 count mono canvas stitched with squared filling stitch. The heart was cut from some handmade paper that had a lace pattern imprinted on it that happened during the drying process. This is mounted on the stitching using a few stitches and then mounted on the handmade paper. This is the end of my journey, and I hope you enjoyed the piece. Thank you.